Hi, thanks for joining us. My name's Gordon Brown and this is the Bloody Scotland Book Club. Just before I introduce the reviewers that you can see on the screen, just a couple of things I need to say. First of all, I'm also an author as well as a board member. My name is actually now Morgan Cry. My latest book is Six Wounds. That's the ad for me over. That's that bit finished. But we're going to discuss three books tonight. So we're going to be discussing Skinner's Rules by Quintin Jardine. We're going to be having a chat about Death in the Sunshine by Steph Broadribb, and then Mr. Mercedes by Stephen King. So a couple of house rules just for yourselves. We want to be as interactive as possible, so you can use the chat room to chat to yourselves. If you want a question for the team, for any of us, can you do us a favour? If you do it in caps, it just makes it easier for us to pull it out. That would work for you. This chat will also be available after the event. So after this is finished, it'll be available on the Facebook Live website for Bloody Scotland. You can do that. And at the end, just before the end, we've got Douglas Skelton coming on to tell you what the books are for next month. But one thing I need to do just before we start is to let you know we have launched Bloody Scotland 2022. You can go to bloodyscotland.com and buy tickets, and there are hundreds of authors on this time. Well, there's over 100 authors on this time. So what I want to do is just introduce who you can see around the screen, and then we'll get going. So, Lynne Addams. Lindsay started the Scottish crime fiction blog There's Been a Murder in April 2013, so you're coming up for nearly your 10th anniversary. And then during lockdown in 2020, she ran a successful online weekend book festival in August and then again in March 21. From that, Reading Between the Lines was born, which is a new online book promotion service that offers online promotions, live readings, online events, and online book launches for authors and publishers. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi.
Kenny Tweeddale, who I can see in my bottom left, but knowing Zoom, he could be anywhere on your screen whatsoever, is the new product development manager at Glencairn Crystal. That's one of Bloody Scotland's sponsors. Glencairn sponsor the McIlvanney Prize and the Debut Prize. He spent 10 months as a kid in hospital. And as you would guess back then, because Kenny looks a lot older than he is, back then, there were no Xboxes, no PlayStations, no multiple televisions or any daytime TV. It was then his love for reading began, and it's remained with him ever since. Big crime fiction fan. For the last 2 years, he's been reader on the Scottish Crime Debut of the Year Award, and also he's one of the judges that judged the overall winner. Hi, Kenny.
Cheers.
Wow, I missed a trick there. I'm on orange juice. I should have gone for my whiskey.
And then we have your glass, of course.
I know, yes, right, okay. That's enough advertising. Move on. So then we've got Fiona Buchanan. So Fiona, from Jane Eyre to Jane Doe, William Shakespeare to William McIlvanney, Anne of Green Gables to Anne Cleeves, Fiona will read it all. You should write, Fiona. This is better stuff than I write.
Yes.
And if the book involves a crime scene, an overworked and cynical detective, and the fight for truth and justice, she'll be there. Given the choice between pretty much anything and reading a book, Fiona will choose a book. This got her into a lot of trouble when she was wee. When asked to do the dishes, she would say, just one more chapter. I've been involved way back in the start of Bloody Scotland since its inception. Fiona is now a reader for the McIlvanney Prize long list. So hello to all of you.
Hi.
No problem. So the way we're going to do this is each of the reviewers are going to introduce the book. They're going to do a quick kind of overview, just a little bit about what it is. And then we have a video from the authors, either reading a bit or just telling us about the book. And once that's finished, we'll go to chat. So we're going to kick off with Quintin Jardine's Skinner's Rules, and I'm going to hand over Lindsay to do a little bit of an introduction.
Hi, everyone. So Quintin Jardine's Skinner's Rules is the first in the Bob Skinner series. So it just says, Edinburgh's hardest cop hunts a serial killer. The book that launched a legend, Skinner's Rules, is the first novel in the best-selling Bob Skinner series by acclaimed author Quintin Jardine. As head of Edinburgh's CID, Detective Chief Superintendent Bob Skinner has seen it all, but even he is shocked by the savagely mutilated corpse discovered in a dark alleyway. The victim is identified as a successful young lawyer, and the motive for the brutal death remains a mystery. Then, further seemingly random killings in the city begin to suggest a vicious serial killer is on the rampage. But when the lawyer's fiancée is also murdered, Skinner realises that someone is in deadly earnest.
Very good. Now we're just going to hear a little bit from Quintin.
I'm going to read to you from chapter 8 of the book. Normally when I read this thing, I begin at the beginning, but I've done that so often I'm bored with it. But I thought chapter 8 was the right length and gives you a flavour of the early Skinner. I have to say he's changed a lot over the years. November is the drabbest month of the year in Edinburgh. There are no tourists, little money in the shops, restaurants and pubs, and as a rule bitter weather, fit to freeze the bronze balls off the Duke of Wellington's horse, rearing on its plinth in front of Register House. But as December draws near and the parsimonious merchants and benevolent city fathers dig into their pockets to illuminate the Christmas message, spend, 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 the old grey city sparkles into life. Looking along the mound from the pavement opposite the Bank of Scotland's modest front door, PC Ian McVicker, preparing for his first Christmas away from Stornoway, thought that the silver-lit tree in the slope in front of the Assembly Hall of the Church of Scotland was just about the brawest thing he'd ever seen. It gave Edinburgh character, he thought, marked it out as a good Christian place after all. PC McVicker was a Free Presbyterian by descent and upbringing, but his months in the city had shown him that there were other things in life than the grim island Sabbath, and colours other than dark blue. Surely God can't take exception to that, thought PC Ian, gazing at the silver tree. The single scream seemed so out of tune with the moment that he almost thought it had been a product of his young imagination, or the voice of God rebuking sinful thoughts. But as his attention returned to the job in hand, he knew that it had been real enough, and it had come from somewhere down below. The new steps, a long open stairway turning through 90 degrees, runs from the mound down to Market Street. They're steep, and those who are less than fit think not twice, but several times at the foot before beginning to climb. PC McVicker's heart was in his mouth as he rushed to the head of the stairs, straining his eyes for movement in the orange-lit shadows below. It did not occur to him to think that there might be danger ahead, and even if it had, he would still have leapt headlong down the steps. That was a woman's scream, and he was a policeman. Ian screamed himself when he saw what was lying at the foot of the stairs. The woman had been short and dumpy in her middle years. She still clutched a straw shopping bag in her right hand. The fingers were twitching slightly as the last motor messages reached them as she lay on her back. A big kitchen cleaver had silenced the scream. It was embedded in the woman's skull from between her eyes to the top of her head. A woolen hat, split almost in two, had fallen away from the grey hair. There was, he observed, feeling ludicrously proud of his professional reaction, very little blood. PC Ian found that as much as he wanted to, he could not move his gaze from that awful sight. And so he only heard the slight sound as the black figure leapt from the shadow on top of the fence behind him. And he only felt the wool of the hard-gloved hand across his mouth, drawing his head back, and the cold of the knife across his throat. Somewhere he may have imagined that he held the gulls crying over a faraway harbour, but all he saw as he slumped to his knees were the pretty Christmas lights away up in Princess Street, as they winked and went out, one by one. Thank you very much.
Now I just want to go and read that again. That was good. So, Lindsay, what did you think? What did you think of the book?
I loved it. As I was saying before we started, I've probably been reading Quintin Jardine since it started, since I got introduced to him like years ago. And then it was me that actually suggested it, because we haven't had any of Bob Skinner yet. And it was actually nice to go back and actually reread it, because as I've said, I've read the whole series bar the latest one, which I'm taking on holiday with me and looking forward to it. But I'd read them all, and it was nice to actually go back and read one that I'd read years ago and actually pick up on things that I completely forgot about. I mean, I actually was thinking halfway through the book, oh yeah, that's what happens in this one, and then I got to like the middle bit, and I'm like, oh no, I'm confusing it with another Bob Skinner book. I'm just like, thinking that I, go back and gonna go, oh, I remember this, or I remember what was going to happen. Like some books you read and you think, yeah, I know the ending to it as soon as I read it, but no, I didn't actually. I completely forgot what it was, and it was great to actually reread it.
Yeah. It has got a very grisly kind of gripping start. I mean, there is a fair number of bodies with a very small number of pages. Kenny, what did you think when you read it?
I enjoyed it. Again, I've actually read it twice now. This was the second time I've been through it. I thoroughly enjoyed it start to finish. It was interesting, I thought, because when I started reading it at first, I thought, there's just so many characters in this. I was trying to remember who everybody was. And trying to keep up with that as it went on, but I realised as I started reading it that whether Quintin's plan was to keep going with this and get many books out of this. The more characters you've got, the more you can kind of spin the stories around. So I figured that was maybe part of the idea behind it. But I enjoyed the character of Bob Skinner as well. I thought that it's very easy. You always look and think, well, Bob Skinner's from Edinburgh, you've got Rebus from Edinburgh. You're always kind of doing a comparison between the two, but I thought that the Bob Skinner character had kind of maybe more sides to him. He had his kind of dark, tough side, but he also had this kind of softer side that came through with it as well. My only criticism, I would say, is that everybody in his team, he had like the best team in the world, and every single person he put into an interview with him, he ended up promoting them. So it must have been pretty good back in those days in the police service, because you get promoted constantly anytime you went for a meeting with him. So I thought that was quite good. But no, out with that, I liked the storyline. I enjoyed I liked the grisly side of it. I quite enjoy the kind of serial killer stalking the streets of Edinburgh, especially when I know quite a few of the streets he's talking about. So when you can picture it in your head exactly what he's talking about, I think it makes things kind of run that bit smoother.
It does. I think that's one of the things, Fiona, I'll just come to you. One of the things I liked about it was, I think he did a video recently where he actually said, this is where it all started. And he's standing at the close. I think he actually stood there because it's almost the beginning of it. And the one thing that comes through is there's a strong sense of place in the book. For me, there was. What about yourself, Fiona?
I really enjoyed it. Unlike everyone else, it's the first of his books that I've read. And so came to it with completely fresh eyes. I think that the piece that you read out there is a really good example of his descriptive ability and how that you could take, his victim was so vivid in that, but also the place was so vivid. And I think that's part of what I enjoyed about his writing. The characters were believable. Bearing in mind that I can't remember exactly when it was written, but it was a good few years ago. So maybe there's certain things that have moved on since then, but I really enjoyed it. Like you said, Gordon, its sense of place, the descriptions of place and how they all interlinked and led us through the slightly convoluted story.
Yeah, it is. I think 93, it's early 90s. I mean, but I don't think it doesn't suffer from that. It doesn't feel like it's out of date. I know some books can be written a while ago. When you read them, they're set, like mobile phones is a classic. They weren't around, they were just thinner on the ground. But for me, one of the interesting bits was I actually asked Quintin, was there any insight behind the book? And his first answer was, it's over 30 years since I was near it. So it's probably 29 years since he read it, but it's only one of the books that it's in two parts. That's because when he finished part one, he thought that was it fairly quickly. I realised it was too short to be viable. So he found a link and wrote was effectively a second book, all done in handwriting that only he could read. And it took 6 weeks to transcribe it, going through back and forward to the office. But without giving away the plot, there is kind of two sides to the story. It is one of those ones, there's a point in the middle where you think, well, that's the conclusion of. Do you think that works in terms of having both sides to the kind of story? Lindsay?
Yeah, it made sense when you actually said at the start. Yeah. You're like, it is odd. It's got the start and then it comes to the conclusion. You're like, wow, it's really quick. And then obviously there's the second bit. You think, well, okay, this will just be the continuing. And then it's maybe a couple of months later and you're like, oh, right, okay, now they've kind of gone off into another tangent. They've gone back over the case and found new clues and stuff. And you're like, eh? And when you first read it, you must be thinking, what's going on here? You just like, it's a bit confusing, but now when you hear Quintin's like justification for it. You're like, right, that makes sense. It's 2 books, because you just think, right, okay, it's either the weird time scale, time jump things that authors like to do, or your brain is just going haywire, and you just think, all right, okay, that's normal. But now it makes actual sense to what it actually is. But yeah, it's quite good, because it doesn't feel like it's, like there is a jump, but it doesn't feel like it's like kind of like statically stops, and then you have to pick up to get it going again. It actually just flows, that you either don't notice it's done that, or it's like, like it just continuing on with reading the next bit. So yeah, I think it does work. It is just a wee bit confusing.
Fiona, Kenny?
I'm a wee bit the same. The only thing I would say is I did notice a switch, and I thought it was a little bit on the odd side. Again, since I've heard the reasoning behind it, it makes a lot more sense. It is relatively seamless, but you do see there's a shift from like one storyline. It takes you completely down a different path without giving anything away. But yeah, it was a wee bit of a kind of odd switch, but hearing the explanation for it, I can see the reasoning for it, and it makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah, I thought the gear shift was a wee bit clunky, but once I accepted that the gear shift was a wee bit clunky, then I just went with it. And once you get to the point where everything's being tied up, it is quite complex, but it does work. And if I'm just intrigued that he actually hand wrote it all in bad handwriting, because then he must have had to go back to the first part to then tie. I mean, maybe you can help, Gordon, on how you do that, but to tie up all those ends is actually quite complex.
I thought it was handwriting. Mine, I wouldn't know it. I'd go back and wouldn't be able to read it at all. So me doing handwriting would be out the window. But I thought what was quite clever was, I know there was a shift in the story, but I thought what he did really well was he dipped back into the beginning, which then gave him reason to say, this is what's happening next, because it was one of those quite a few, oh yeah, that happened back then sort of moments. And for something like that, it's actually quite difficult to do, because you can kind of lose track. I know you can go back through and edit, but sometimes you can lose that thought process when you're moving. And for me, I really liked that, because once I didn't know he'd done that. I read the same, got to that bit. And then what I found myself thinking was, okay, so that's why that happened, and that's why that happened, and that's why that happened. And there are quite a few characters in there. It does take a little bit of getting used to who's doing what. But by the time I got to about 2/3 of the way through, I was flying through it just to see where it was going at the end.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I was going to say was there is a bit of Skinner going off-piste, that part of the book, which I don't know about you, but it's been done a lot. But then when you remember when this was written, it wasn't not as common to do that when the books first. There's a lot of people have done it since, but there's a lot of the books back then. That whole idea of being, here's the rigid policeman, but actually the rigid policeman is going to stop being that because he thinks there's something wrong. Did that appeal?
I think I always quite like it when the detectives go a bit off-piste, and so yeah, that was. I think that was a good addition to it.
Yeah, me too. I think that's one of the things I always liked about Quintin Jardine was he always had Bob Skinner. He was like set as like, obviously he was like, he moved up the ranks and stuff, but he always had that side of him. And even to the ones now, the current ones where he's no longer a police officer and he's out on his own and he investigates, he always had that sort of like, he could actually be the good cop, bad cop, because there's sometimes Bob Skinner would do things that you were like, what? No chief and constable's ever going to do that, or assistant chief constable, without ending up like in jail. But it was just that sort of the character was just like perfect, perfectly written, and obviously always sort of drew you in, because I mean that sometimes you loved Bob Skinner and other times you were like, you actually hate the character, like some of his choices that he made, you were like, what is Quintin doing? But then he would bring it back and you'd be like, you forgave him basically.
Yeah, I think one of the things. Oh, sorry, Kenny, on you go. Fire in.
Oh, I was only going to kind of agree that he definitely had the two sides you could see to him. He had the kind of rigid, by the rules cop, but he wasn't afraid to kind of go the other direction if he felt it was the right thing to do. He also was shown to have he wasn't just this rough and tough guy. He also had this soft side where you seen with his bringing up his daughter and also his love life in it. The first book, I thought the kind of love life side of it was a wee bit kind of Mills and Boonish. I thought it was a wee bit kind of too nicey. But in fact, his partner in it, I felt her only kind of real part of that book was to link the two stories together. I thought that was her main function in that book. But obviously things move on from that point. But no, I thought his character was good because he wasn't just this rough, tough character. He did have both sides of it. And he had a lot of feelings for the people who worked for him, and he did a lot to help them. I know I was kidding on earlier on about the many promotions, but he obviously looked after his team. He felt they were worth looking after. So he had several different sides to him. I thought were all brought together a good character.
There's a couple of things I picked up on. There's one of the ones, he's back in the house at one point and he's relaxing, so he gets changed, but he gets changed into a leisure suit. And I'm thinking, oh my God, like it's just one of those things. It was such a good line. It's exactly what it feels like he would do. We take off one suit and then put on the other suit and say, well, this is my leisure suit. This is what I hang around the house in. And the other bit is some of the descriptive phrases that Quintin's got in there. There was one he was describing somebody's ice cream and Guinness. I just love that sort of stuff because it's not a lot of words, but it says a lot of things, if that makes sense. So from an overall point of view, because we're going to move on to the book, was it a good book, an okay book, or a bad book?
Good book.
Good book.
Very good book. It was
Very
nice
good.
to read it.
In fact, it was a good book, and I will now go and read more of the series.
He has written a lot. I mean, it's impressive. That keeping a series that long is a difficult thing. I am nowhere near doing anything like that with any series. And as he said during the reading, obviously he can see, Bob, you've read them, Lindsay, and a lot of people have, the change in the character. But actually, to be fair, that's what happens to people. People do change. They move from one place to the other. So, but that is an impressive array. So that was Quintin Jardine's. That was Skinner's Rules. That was the first in the Bob Skinner series. If you get a chance to go back to it, I saw someone put up there, Louise Colvin was saying, thoroughly enjoyed Skinner's Rules, loved the characterisation. Skinner right from the start, looking forward to reading more of the series. And Helen Ansari commented, love the Skinner series, but for some reason she'd never read the first one. It was great to find out how the team are brought together. That must be quite good, having read lots of them and then go back and say, oh, that's where they came from. So that's our first book. So we're now going to move on to our next book. Our next book is Death in the Sunshine, and that's by Steph Broadribb. And Fiona's going to do a wee introduction, and then we have a reading by Steph.
Okay, so this is the first book in the Retired Detectives Club series. The story is set in an upmarket retirement community in Florida, where the body of a young woman is found floating in the swimming pool, surrounded by dollar bills, by our first main character. Moira is a former undercover police officer, and once the local police arrive to investigate the crime, we meet a second character, Philip. He too is British, and he tries to make his way into the crime scene, and we start to see how his character's shaping up a bit. Helping her to recover from the shock and get her to reveal more about the crime scene, Philip takes Moira to his house where she meets his wife Lizzie, who gives her hot sweet tea, and they start to discuss what happened. And Moira's been quite reticent in giving out her clues. Then we get a visit from Rick, who's ex-USDAA. And if we accept the serendipity that brings all these people together in the same retirement village at the same time in Florida, we have our gang in place to investigate where the police don't seem to be paying much attention. Plot's great with lots of clues and red herrings, and we realise that the upmarket retirement community is a bit too good to be true, and the local police are looking for easy answers and a quick arrest. But our gang of four are all hiding secrets as well, and some of which are teased out during the story as our characters develop. And now we're going to hear a reading from Death in the Sunshine by Steph.
Just before sunrise is Moira's favourite time. Dawn is when the day has most promise. It's still a blank slate, a tabula rasa. It gives her another opportunity to try and forget what happened and focus on making something new again. Closing the gate to the backyard, she checks the coast is clear and steps out onto the white gravel path. She's happy no one's around. She doesn't like to be watched, prefers to blend into the background, hidden in plain sight. But it's proving much harder here on the homestead than she'd imagined. She follows the circular walking track as it snakes around the perimeter of the Ocean Mist district towards Manatee Recreation Park. There's a chill to the air, and it's a 20-minute walk. Zipping her hoodie, Moira ups her pace. She'll try to do the walk in 18 minutes today. She always likes to have a goal. As she walks, Moira hums to herself. The sun is starting to rise, and the path ahead is free of people for as far as she can see. Good. It isn't that she dislikes people exactly, but since moving to the homestead retirement community a month ago, she's come to realise just how much the people here like to talk. It's a relief to start the day not having to be cordial with anyone. She's never been very good at being cordial. Everyone here in this purpose-built community for people over 55 years old is just so damn friendly. There's no anonymity like you have in a big city. She hopes she'll get used to it because at this time of day, with the sun starting to burn the dew from the grass and the silence broken only by the morning call of the birds, the place is so peaceful. And she really needs some peace. She checks her watch. It's 6:49 a.m. She's on track, in the groove she's got into since moving. Rise at 6 a.m, have a protein shake, head to the park for a swim as the sun finishes coming up, then back to the house to walk the dogs. It's the end of week 4 and she's got the timings down pat. If she's free and clear of the pool by 8:30, she should have the place to herself and avoid any chance of small talk. It's a good motivator. The gravel crunches beneath her trainers as she powers up an incline. Before moving here, she'd always thought of Florida as flat, but she was wrong. This part of Central Florida is pretty undulating, and that's fine. She's glad of the added cardio workout. Slowing her pace, she reaches the top of the ridge. Moira takes a sip from her water bottle and looks at the view. On her left are the backyards of the uniformly cream stucco houses that border the path. Lawns of the coarse Florida grass that's much better in this heat than its more delicate British counterpart. Screened-in stone patios, huge gas-powered grills, and the occasional plunge pool or hot tub, all of them neat and ordered and manicured within an inch of their lives, as stipulated in the rules of residency. She keeps walking and takes another sip. To her right, she can see straight across the open grasslands of Misty Plains, all the way to the distant line of trees that stand sentry along the border between Ocean Mist District and the as yet unconstructed and unnamed District 11. Moira doesn't know how many acres lie between her and the trees, but it has to be a hell of a lot. Until just over a month ago, she'd only ever lived and worked in London. The wide open space here still seems alien. But even though it is alien, she's glad of it. The space is one of the main reasons she'd picked this place to retire. She's had enough of urban, enough of London, enough of the ever-increasing bureaucracy and paperwork that being an undercover detective had come to involve. She wanted a total change, and that's what the homestead sells itself on. A new home for a new chapter of your life. Moira grimaces. She needs that fresh start. Given everything that's happened earlier this year, leaving was the right thing and the safest thing to do. She just hadn't anticipated it would be so damn hard.
Very good. I'd just like to say thanks very much for Steph for flying all the way to Florida to do that clip for us. Love the background there, Steph. That was gorgeous. Yes, if you just put in your expenses claim for the flight, we'll totally ignore it. So, Fiona, from your point of view, you start off. What do you think of the book?
I devoured it in one sitting. It was a real page turner. I think the shifting points of view, so each of our characters, we meet each of them and each of them has a separate chapter. So we've constantly got a shifting point of view of the story, which is gradually revealing clues about the characters of each of the 4. And they're each pulling out the different aspects of the crime with their own little speciality. So I really enjoyed it. Anywhere that's got a swimming pool and a beach, and I'm going to love the setting, for goodness sake. And I thought that there were enough clues to keep me going without giving anything away. I like to work out how we're going to get to who the person is that committed the crime. So there were enough enough clues being dropped to take me to the next bit, and each chapter made me want to just do as I said earlier, just one more chapter. So yeah, all in all, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it has done extraordinarily well. Steph's done really good on this. Lindsay, what were you thinking about the book when you were reading it?
The first thing that actually came to my mind was it reminds me of the old BBC One TV show New Tricks, because obviously when I read went on Amazon and had a look to see what the book was about before we decided, I was like, oh wow, that kind of like retired, it kind of reminds me of a wee bit of New Tricks, where they were all old English. And then I thought, well, it's going to be like all American cops. I never expected, them all to have, well, majority of them were British. That took me by surprise. I was really expecting it to be 4 like retired American detectives, and I was going, how am I going to get into this? Because I always kind of find it hard to relate to the American ones, because I can't work out, like the equivalent to the British. And I was actually quite pleasantly surprised to find that it was like some of them were British, and it was nice, because you thought they were all going to be old, sort of like old school detectives, and that's kind of what made me into the New Tricks thing. But no, they were all like more like younger, like younger characters, and I really enjoyed it. It was a book that if I'd seen it, I'd have gone, that's not for me, but I actually quite enjoyed it. And I think about in the questions, it also had a wee bit of Death in Paradise as well, kind of thing, the Death In kind of title, and that's what the immediate things was, New Tricks and Death in Paradise, which is my TV staples in my house. But yeah, it was really, really interesting. I devoured it as well. I think it took me 2 days to read it, but yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. It was a nice pace. Sometimes you get books that just keep going and going and going, and you kind of lose track of what's going on. But this one was nice. It was easily read because of what Fiona was saying about the different characters, the different chapters. I like that. I always like that, because then your mind doesn't get muddled and you start thinking that's this what character's speaking again. But yeah, that was a nice. A nice relaxation.
I do. And Kenny, did you get it? When I read the title, not so much The Death in the Sunshine, but The Retired Detective Clubs, did you have a Richard Osman thing going on in your head before you picked it up?
I had a wee bit. I mean, I must admit, I feel as if I'm a wee bit of the kind of bad cop here. I was a wee bit mixed when I read the book. I found it a wee bit difficult to the kind of the community that was fully all these retired police officers in it. And especially that 3 of them actually were over from Britain. I thought the pace of the story was good, and I liked the fact, as you said, Fiona, that there was enough wee clues there to keep you going, so you could try and figure things out yourself. I found it a wee bit hard to warm to a couple of the British characters. The 2 kind of main ones that were the 2 DCIs that were kind of trying to decide who was the best one to lead the investigation. I found the 2 then to be a wee bit annoying at times through it, especially the male person that was in it. I also thought the kind of portrayal of the American police was, I don't know, they all seem to be the kind of dumbest police force in the world. I know it kind of helped the storyline along, but I just thought, could they be this ineffective and this stupid? But
you don't think that they were hiding something?
That's the thing. I wondered if there was going to be a backstory behind it. There was going to be something that revealed there was a payoff or something. I wasn't sure, but I'd never really quite reached that point. And obviously there was a thing about, without giving anything away, there was obviously underlying backstories behind the kind of 2 main British DCIs about what was going to come out, what was going to be revealed in that. And that got mentioned a lot through the book. So I got to the point where I was getting teased, and then I got to the point I thought, oh, just bloody tell me what's what it was,
Yeah,
but my other wee gripe, and this is probably something really petty because I'm just a bit daft with these, but they used their evidence board that they were writing up on. They used the patio doors, which I thought, if I was somebody outside walking by the house, I would just read what they wrote on the patio doors from outside. But I'm being very picky. It wasn't. I think it's probably one of those books if I picked up, I'd have went, no, that's not for me. And I probably enjoyed it more than I kind of maybe thought I was going to, but there was still some bits in it I wasn't a huge fan of.
I think that's right, but I took it that it's a scene setter, so it's the Retired Detectives Club series. And so introducing all these, so it's a bit like the pilot on a TV programme. it's quite introducing all the aspects of your main group.
Yeah.
That's the main thing, Fiona, I was going to say, was I felt it was as if it could have been a script written for a TV show, like a kind of Murder, She Wrote, or as you've said, Death in Paradise, or any other programme. I thought it could have been written more as a kind of TV type script. It could have been an ongoing thing as opposed to a novel.
I think though, I get the impression there's going to be others. I mean, I had the same thing when I started to write the new Spanish series. You get the problem at the beginning of saying you got to introduce all these characters. It was about the same when you read the Bob Skinner book at the beginning. There's a lot of characters in there to get to grips. I actually quite liked the fact that I asked Steph where the idea came from. One of the things she said was that it wasn't long after her father passed. She was out in Florida with her stepmom looking for a home, and they went to one of these big communities, and there's lots of them out in Florida. So they went and they found all that stuff, pools, tennis and everything else. But what got her was just the sheer scale of them. You're talking about ones that are like the size of a city. So actually, when you know the scale of them, it's not unlikely that expats would get together. That bit for me is quite, because my Spanish series, that's exactly what I got to. And I kind of got that from Steph, that what's happening is they were just bored. Like it's great to go to Florida and be there, but I get the impression they were bored and they were desperate to do something. And when you talk about the other cops, the American cops, I got more the impression the American cops didn't want to interfere. They don't want Brits coming across and saying, this is what you do, this is how you do it. That would easily hack off. For me, that was actually what was quite good, is that's going to play against each other the whole way through. For me, I quite like that, because I quite like the idea they're just going to end up fighting the Americans the whole way if that's where it's going. It was kind of where it came from. But I think the other thing as well is, the one thing I thought was Moira was very reluctant. Yeah. She was reluctant to give stuff up and she didn't want to be there, but she kept getting dragged in. She couldn't help herself but say, well, I'll get a wee bit more involved. How do you think that played out, Fiona?
Yeah, well, she's obviously trying to forget something.
Yeah.
Something's happened in her past, and she's left it behind in London. So she doesn't want to, but she can't help herself, because probably she is bored, but she's also intrigued by what's going on. And I think if I had a bit of a gripe with gripe's the wrong word, because I enjoyed the book, but I felt that our victim was kind of left behind. So we had, and just before we started talking this evening, I actually was trying to remember what her name was, and I couldn't remember her name. And so I feel that the victim was maybe a wee bit left behind in that, but that our characters were all saying, and remember, the victim's got to get justice and all that kind of thing. But that for us as readers, that we didn't have that same sense of who she had been and why she had done all those things. I know that the facts of what she did were there, but there was nothing other than that sort of pen portrait of just the body in the pool.
Yeah. And Lindsay, one of the things I thought, because exactly that, but I think they started to treat it, because I know you didn't like the patio doors. Okay, I get that, Kerry, in terms of doing it. But actually, I just think they started to treat it like a case. And therefore, sometimes I think in those ones, the victim can become a bit of well, that's the object. That's what we're trying to investigate. We're trying to figure what happened round there. Lindsay, what did you think from that point of view?
Yeah, I was going to say, I kind of agree with Fiona. And also, it's kind of like you got that feeling like, once a cop, always a cop, kind of thing. Like, they were detectives their whole lives, or crime scene investigators. And, they came out because they decided to take early retirement. We don't actually really know why Rick left. We also know why the Moira, well, we kind of are starting to get to, by the end, what's happened with Moira. We get to see about the backstory, and I can't remember what the couple were. Is it Philip and his wife was?
Lizzie,
that's
Lizzie.
it. Obviously, there's obviously something happened there with them, but obviously, you can see in their minds that they either went themselves, or obviously something happened and they had to leave. But they're like kind of wanting to be drawn back into the police, into this lifestyle. Probably it's all they've ever known, and one chance to go, they decide to They decide, let's just go for it, kind of stuff. You do get the feeling that Moira doesn't really want to, with her circumstances, but she obviously gets dragged in, and you can kind of see the excitement, kind of like, all right, okay, I'm being dragged into it, but she secretly, you kind of get that feeling she actually wants to be back and investigating and stuff like that. I kind of like that, kind of like between Moira and felt kind of like jostling for the, you know, like the top dog position kind of thing. But yeah, I'm quite looking forward to actually getting the next book, because actually when I was on Amazon, it gives me like choices, like it comes up with next book to read, and it's actually recommended the next one. So I'm like, ooh, I might pre-order that, because I'm kind of excited to actually read it.
I think it's a bit of a shame that poor old Philip didn't have any redeeming qualities at all. There was nothing about him that you could like. That's just a bit of a shame.
But I think with books like this, I think the important thing, and for me, I thought what Steph did well in this is that people don't let go of the past easily. If you've been doing something for that long, it might sound odd to us, but I know people that worked in a job for 30 or 40 years, and 20 years later, they still talk about the job. They still talk about what they did, how they did it, and they go about it. And in the police, my dad was police, and when he came out, he still acted like a policeman. Like there was nothing, there was like, he was doing it. And actually, that's what I think the gist of what Watts in here is, that's exactly what these guys, they're just sitting out there. They thought it was a great idea, really bored. You know, this is going to be wonderful, sunshine, da-da-da. I'm actually quite bored. Like I've come out of something. And that's why I think that, for me, that was the essence. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but the essence for me was these people saying, I can still do this. I can still make a difference. Here's another way of doing it. I have to say, though, I thought when I saw the title, I thought, is this a Richard Osman? And it's absolutely not. It's not that type of book at all.
I mean, the thing I did, I found the most kind of the best part of it was as you say, it's inbuilt in the police that they never want to leave the job, they never want to retire. So any opportunity like that was come up, that's the bit I really did get. If they were all in a community and there was a murder, then the first thing they'd want to do was try and get involved in some way or form. And I thought that was a bit that kind of brought it all together. I thought that was the most kind of, for me, the most believable part. I thought was quite interesting.
And it's funny because, as Steph said as well, she said the character of Rick slightly modelled on one of my stepmom's neighbours, who's well into their 70s, works out at the local gym every day without fail. But she said, well, I really wanted characters to be older. The four main characters are from mid-50s to early 70s. Older. Hey, come on, Steph. What do you mean older? I mean, like, come on, see, yeah, north of 80. That's not north of 60. But she does say, after all, 60 is the new 40. And it kind of sums up what's going on, because there are a lot out there in terms of taking that older and saying, well, there is a period where you've done all that. Do you really want to stop? And that's what came through well for me within the book itself. So that was Steph Broadribb. That was Death in the Sunshine. So we've had a wee chat about that, and we've got our last book to move on to. And it's a kind of a bit of a change. Compared to all three are very, very different in terms of the crime. So we're going to look at Mr. Mercedes by Stephen King, and Kenny's going to give us a wee bit of overview. And then we've got Mr. King actually telling us where the idea from the story came from. We did write to him to ask him to do a little bit of a reading, and he was on Bloody Scotland last year, but he didn't reply to us. I'm sure he gets millions of emails, but we have got a clip of saying where the idea came from. So Kenny, off you go.
Okay, well, Mr. Mercedes is a detective thriller novel by the American author Stephen King, as you've said. It's a pretty big shift in genre for Stephen King, because he predominantly writes novels with more of a supernatural theme, but this was really his first foray into crime fiction. The novel itself starts with a deranged psychopathic killer driving a stolen Mercedes-Benz into a large crowd of people attending a local job fair. This crime would then become known as the City Centre Massacre, and for recently retired police detective Bill Hodges, it was one of the unsolved crimes he had to leave behind until the killer, who then became dubbed as Mr. Mercedes, makes contact with him and starts to kind of goad him a bit. What follows after that is a kind of cat and mouse pursuit between the two of them, and Hodges ended up being assisted by a teenage boy called Jerome and a very kind of troubled middle-aged woman called Holly Gibney. This mismatched trio are kind of thrown together by circumstance more than anything else, but they must work together to stop this Mr. Mercedes from committing his next act of terrorism, which is just round the corner. The The story itself was a very good read, and the characters that were built from it, the Bill Hodges character, the main police officer, there were two more kind of spin-off novels based on this character, but also the character Holly Gibney as well. There was spin-off books around that character, so it was a well kind of put together few characters there that could be used to evolve into different storylines beyond this story.
Right, we'll listen to a bit of Mr. King. Just
Yep.
bear with us. This is actually a clip from YouTube, so there might be a bit of fiddling around with the screen to get it right. But this is where the story from Mr. Mercedes came from.
When I was driving up from Florida to Maine last year, because I always drive back and forth, I stopped the first night in South Carolina, and I stayed at a motel, Motel 6 or something like that. And you know, there's really not anything to do there but turn on the TV and kick back and watch the local news and whatever else happens to be on. So I turned on the TV and there was the local news, and they had this story. And the story was about something that had happened at a McDonald's. The McDonald's, you know, this was like a year ago. The economy still really just absolutely wretched. And so McDonald's announced that they were hiring in this town. It might have been Charleston, I'm not sure. But all these people turned up. There were like 1,000 people that turned up to apply for jobs. And there was one woman in this bunch of people that was waiting to try to get a job who had had a fight with another woman the day before. The first woman was married to this guy. She caught the woman who was applying for a job in McDonald's in bed with her husband. She got wicked pissed. And she decided that she was going to confront this woman, you know, and basically rip her hair off if that was possible. So she got in her car. She found out that the woman was applying for a job at McDonald's. And she drove there, and she got out of the car, pushed her way through all these job applicants, and grabbed this woman and started to shake her. They had a fight. The woman who was applying for a job broke away and disappeared into the car, into the crowd. So the woman who had come there got back into her car, put it in gear, and drove into the job seekers. They just went everywhere. There was cell phone footage of it. She got the woman, pasted her a couple of good ones, got back into her car, threw it in reverse, and backed over a bunch more people on her way out. Well, 2 people were killed. And I thought to myself, I want to write about this.
As you do if you're Mr. King. So, Kenny, what did you think?
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was a very good read. I was very interested to see what the transition would be like from going to writing more kind of supernatural type books to, as I say, the kind of crime detective fiction. But I thought it was a very good book. I thought the characters in it were very believable. I thought the main character, Bill Hodges, a retired policeman, was basically painted as your stereotypical type kind of policeman. But once you see some of the people surrounding him and how his behaviour's changed through it, I think you actually see him evolving from being this kind of stereotypical guy to learning more about himself and about how he makes judgments in people and how he maybe just jumps to conclusions without actually learning about people and knowing about people, especially some of the female characters in the book. So I thought it was a very good book.
Lindsay, I'll throw my hand up. I am a big Stephen King fan. My first few books I tried to write were horror books. Well, they weren't horror, but I tried to write it. But what I would say, if you've read a lot of Stephen King, is I didn't think the jump was as big as people say, because Stephen spends a lot of time describing small town America and the people inside it in the books. And that to me is what works here. It does have some bits of that, but I actually think, what did you think, Lindsay, from your point of view in terms of the book itself?
Yeah, I was going to say, when I read that you were Stephen King, I was like, okay. I thought Stephen King was a horror, and I remember seeing Carrie, and I'm like, okay. I was like, right, okay, I trust you guys. You know, it'll be something different, and it came, and I I haven't been well, so just lying in my bed reading it, and I got hooked. And actually, when I was speaking to like friends and keeping in touch and stuff, and they're like, Lindsay, you'll be using this time to like read and like making jokes, because I'd made jokes like a week ago about lockdown and the TBR pile going down, and now I was obviously rising again with working again, and I'm sitting there reading, and I'm really enjoying it. And I was like, what are you reading? Stephen King. And they're like, Stephen King, that's way out of your genre. I mean, I do like different genres, but no, it wasn't what I was expecting. I mean, there was a wee bit of like kind of like horror when it started. You were like gripped it with this like massacre, but then you were thinking, well, suppose in America we read about like people like gunmen walking into schools and shooting like all the time, and like that kind of like into nightclubs and all that kind of thing, with everything that's going on. So you think, well, it's actually quite believable that a crime novel, an American crime novel, could start like that. But yeah, it was really interesting. The one thing for me, it was the fact that it was kind of getting lost with the fact that instead of being one chapter Bill, one chapter Brady, one chapter Bill, one chapter Brady, one chapter Holly, it was starting to be like they were all together. And some of the times, I think it was halfway through the book, and it was Bill talking, and then it was Brady talking. I think he was on his way to actually the end, to his next target, and I'm thinking, is Bill already there? What's happened? Why is Bill in a wheelchair? Sorry, I don't think that's a spoiler. I get where you're coming from. I think though, King is very good at it. I like the fact that he can change POV quite quickly, because sometimes it speeds up a chapter because you're getting 3 points of view of the same thing, one after the other. The interesting thing as well, it's actually part of a trilogy, which for me was, because I knew when they wrote it, I knew that was coming down the line. But Fiona, from your point of view, it's not what you would normally expect, and that's what Lindsay's just said. Did it work for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I read a lot of Stephen King when I was young, and I've always really liked. He's got this brilliant way of pitting good against evil, and that I think that comes out really well in this. I love the start, the way he set the scene at the job fair and the hopelessness of all the people who were there. But yeah, just going through the book, and I don't think Stephen King should write sex scenes. Just say it. Hashtag.
Hang on, I've got his mobile number here, Fiona. I'll just.
I mean, it's not that he's ever asked for my opinion before, but I'm just, and I think he's not that great. And again, I would come back to what we're saying about one of the earlier books. It was written quite a long time ago, and some of his depictions of women are left me a wee bit not sure that I like that. It's all very ideal, either idealist, or it's like the very icky relationship between Brady and his mum Deborah.
Yeah.
And I found that his way of writing women is not the best. I do love the good against evil. I've always loved that about him. Is that if anyone's read The Stand, it's so black and white.
I do think what he's good at, though, is see when he's doing the icky bits or the bits that are slightly off-piste on language and the rest of it. I always think with King, it's the character speaking, not him. There are people out there that do that. I don't think he shies away from speaking the way they would, because with PC, it's really difficult to say things. But King's always said it. If that's what the guy says, that's what the guy says. If that's what the guy believes, it's the character that's within it. I think for me, the other bit that I like about it, and it's one of those ones, King likes to go back over the ground he's already been over. He likes to go back and pull something that was said earlier and pull it out again, because there's something in there. Mm-hmm. He's very good at that. There was something, they went through it. There's a couple, it's without giving spoilers, but there's one scene where he just keeps going back to the same thing to do with the Mercedes. Because he knows there's something there. And I quite like that, because it starts to pull out information bit by bit by bit, as opposed to suddenly a revelation scene. That for me is very much how, when I've read King over the years, I quite like that. It's how he starts to pull the characters into what they are. The other thing I was going to ask the question was the whole idea of that split narrative, that constantly moving narrative, Kenny. How did that grab you, as opposed to saying, well, this is sticking on one character and this sticking on one place. How did you like that?
I'm a wee bit different from Lindsay. I quite liked it because I think it makes you read the book faster. I think it makes you not want to put the book down. I feel it gives a momentum to it. It keeps you going, right, that's their point of view, or that takes them to that point, and then you move on to the next person, it takes them to that. I think that it gives a bit of speed and momentum to the actual story itself and keeps you engaged through.
Yep. And the other thing is, it's funny you should say that, Fiona. There's a line out of it somewhere where it says, the truth is darkness, and the only thing that matters is making a statement before one enters it. Cutting the skin of the world and leaving a scar. After all, that's what history is, scar tissue. It's that you do something and you move on, and you've either done the right thing or the wrong thing. And I was amazingly surprised when I wrote this, because when I read this, I'd only just started thinking about crime writing, and what upset me was I just thought it was so good. And yeah, I had the same thing, which is Stephen King doesn't write detective novels. And then I thought, yes, he does. What a swine. It's just cheating. Maybe get someone else to do it for it. He hasn't told us. But for me, I thought I just thoroughly enjoyed it. But it's not a traditional detective novel in any shape or form. And if you read the rest of the trilogy, it really isn't. It starts to become something very different. Any thoughts on that?
One of the things that confused me slightly was this dedicated police officer who couldn't give the case up, but he had, there's the relationship he had with his former partner, and the opportunities he had to share something that would have not meant the ending that we ended up with, that could have perhaps prevented that. Now, okay, that's a story device, but would that dedicated former police officer have done that?
I think, Fiona, I'm a wee bit, that was the one thing I found a wee bit odd with the book, is that I felt he wrote his partner into solving every other crime in the state that kept him as the reason for not being able to involve him in it, and I always thought, if you're that close a relationship with your ex-partner, you would involve them as much as possible. Although I could see the thing where he didn't want to be left out as well. He didn't want to be left out of the case because he felt he was intrinsically the kind of one of the main people in it and wanted to take it to solution. But I felt a wee bit uneasy with that myself.
And Lindsay, what did you think of Brady Hartsfield? How did he come across in it?
He was the one that actually made me think this is a Stephen King novel. This is a creepy character, like horror character that Stephen King's known for. But then I love like a lot of like the American programs like Criminal Minds, and Brady reminded me of like some of the unsubs that they used on those the quintessential creepy serial killer. You kind of got the Shackles, or the young laddie that nobody would look at, and then when they said who it was, they'd be like, oh, he was the sweetest young lad, and he wouldn't hurt a fly. But obviously, but he was a character that made you think this is a Stephen King novel, because it was just that creepy, the whole story with the line with his mother and everything. That was what was like, this is the Stephen King part. This is the character. I mean, I was surprised at how young he was. I mean, I was thinking when you kind of read the back of it, you were like, yeah, you're going to be an older guy kind of thing that's gone kind of like. But the fact that he was so young and stuff like that, and you're like, okay, I was like, it was just like a little bit scary kind of. But you were hoping that you would get his comeuppance. Really, it was the character that you just hated. You was like, just please stop.
Is he not your worst nightmare though? Because he's got no empathy. And his brain's working in this horrible way, and yet he's the one in the ice. It's that whole ice cream van thing going on as well. It's like boys and girls come out to play, ice cream, and then, but in his head, all these things that are going on, he is actually a worst nightmare scenario. Yeah,
definitely.
And I think what I like is there's a couple of scenes in there when they're on the email and they're jousting with each other. And that's when Brady sometimes does get his comeuppance, because he's just been goaded into the wrong thing. And for me, he has to be that bad for that to happen. Otherwise, it just wouldn't work overall. So we're not far away from the end. I do need to introduce Douglas, who's going to introduce what's coming on just in a minute. But your overall view on Mr. Mercedes?
Oh, you can't put a Stephen King book down ever.
Yeah.
Right.
And I forgot to mention, Gordon McKee commented earlier when we were talking about Steph's book. He says, I do feel bad for authors who spend weeks and months writing books. When we tear through them in a single night, I blasted through it too. I said, I don't mind that, lads. If you want to read my books and go through it in a night, I don't care. I'm quite happy with that. And Sharon Bearden said she loved Mr. Mercedes. So just before we finish off, I'll say goodbye to you all. What we're going to do is next month, Douglas is coming on board at the moment. So it's the last Wednesday of next month. It's only Thursday this month because we had the launch in London of Bloody Scotland last night. So it'll move back to the Wednesday. And we're just going to hear from Douglas, who should be appearing in a second, who's going to tell us what we're reading for next month's book club. Mr. Skelton, or should I say the long-listed Mr. Skelton?
Yes, of course you should say that. That's in the contract, and my agent demands that everybody says that. Even people that don't know me in the street have to say that. You're the long-listed Douglas Skelton.
That's fine. Thanks for the 20 quid.
And I say, no, it's just it's the way I stand. Now, my name is Douglas Skelton, and I'll be the guest chair for July's Bloody Scotland Book Club, casting a stern but paternal eye over the young whippersnapper reviewers, who will be Suze Clark-Morris, Louise Fairbairn, and Jonathan Whitelaw. And the books that they'll be looking at are Mary Paulson Ellis's Emily Noble's Disgrace, Johanna Gustafson's Block 46, and Reginald Hill's On Beulah Height. So that'll be an exciting show, and that's Wednesday, July 27th at 7 p.m, right here. Be there or be square.
Fair enough. Yeah. And Douglas is actually going to be sitting there for a month, just waiting.
Yes.
He's doing nothing else for the rest of the month but sitting. So you can tune in anytime you want, watch him eat his breakfast, have his dinner. He'll be sitting right there. Thanks, Douglas.
Hey, Gordon.
No problem. So I'd just like to say a big thanks to the three of you, Fiona, Lindsay and Kenny, for doing the reading, doing the reviewing for a great show tonight. It's been really, really good fun doing it. And I hope you enjoyed being part of it as well. It's just great. I love this for the fact that you start to read books that you probably either wouldn't read or you've decided, well, they're too long ago, I'm not going to pick them back up. I love finding books like that. So just from the book club, I'd just like to say thanks to all three of you. I'd like to say thanks to everybody that's tuned in tonight. Thanks very much for coming along. As Douglas said, last Wednesday of the month is when we're on at 7 o'clock. If you want to watch this, if you missed it, or you know someone else that might want to listen to what we said, this will be on Facebook Live. Tomorrow, I think it is, it will go up, so therefore you are able to watch it again. And I will do one last plug for the fact that Bloody Scotland tickets are now on sale. So thanks very much, Kenny, thanks Fiona, and thanks Lindsay, and thanks for everybody for listening.